Welcome everybody to the 37th, I think, evening fireside talk in the Great Minds, Great Lives series. And a particularly warm welcome to everybody who is new to this series with us today, which is with one of Britain's greatest entrepreneurs and public figures. We're going to be talking about our entrepreneurs born or made. So Luke Johnson's full achievements and career will become obvious. I won't mention those at the beginning, but I will just say that he is author, if you don't already know, of some 7 books. He is chair or past chair of a wide range of bodies, including Channel 4, the Royal Society of Arts, the Institute of Cancer Research and Startup Britain, a journalist on many outlets, currently at the Sunday Times. His article yesterday, Economists Don't Create Jobs, Entrepreneurs Do, will have themes that are going to be picked up today. And indeed, if you don't already read Luke's column weekly, you ought to, because it's the most stimulating, practical, but also intellectual of all the business columns anywhere. He was a regular journalist in the Financial Times and earlier in the Sunday Telegraph. He's on the advisory board of Standpoint. And so it is a truly broad figure. And this career, Luke, began in the terrible winter. It was a bad winter in 1962 in February. And you were the son of the very famous intellectual and writer and editor Paul Johnson. To what extent was your thinking shaped by that illustrious father?
Well, I think in various ways. One is he's always been independently minded, and although he wasn't a businessman, he was a self-employed author for decades. And so I think the idea of ploughing your own furrow in life and not being part of a big organization or an institution always appealed. I think in that sense, and also his willingness at various points in his career to be a contrarian. For example, in the late 70s, although he'd been socialist for decades, he decided that the Union were destroying Britain. And so he very publicly left the Labour Party and defected to the Tories, which by then, or shortly after, were run by Mrs. Thatcher. And so he became a strong advocate for markets and free enterprise and private business and property and ideas of the right. And so I think in that sense, he didn't mind being in a minority amongst those who'd been, his contemporaries and friends. And also I think it was at a formative age for me. I was at university and thinking about what I was going to do with my career in those years. And so his embrace of business coincided with my interest in business and being an entrepreneur. So I think in that sense, he was very formative.
Now, you weren't sent by him, as might have been expected, perhaps, to an independent school. You went to a state school, and then you went on to admittedly a grammar school, Langley Grammar. You then went on to Magdalen College, Oxford, where you began reading medicine before changing, and you were already hugely involved in entrepreneurial activities. How significant was that interview with Richard Branson on his houseboat in making you an entrepreneur, or is that just apocryphal?
I think it was important.
How did it come about?
it came about because my then business partner and I wanted to meet Branson. This was in about 1980 or so, and he wasn't nearly as famous or as high profile as he is now. And we persuaded him to give us an interview. We were working for the student newspaper. Frankly, we just used the student newspaper as an excuse to get the interview because we wanted to meet him. And I think the career he had pursued and the adventure that his life seemed was very inspirational. And, I think the idea that you could control your own destiny and work for yourself, that you didn't have to be a banker or a lawyer or an accountant or a management consultant and, work for someone else, became much more real. And starting businesses and creating businesses seemed terribly exciting. And so I think that whole phase, those 3 years when in theory I was studying for an undergraduate degree, but most of my energy was devoted to student businesses that Hugh, my then business partner, and I were starting. And that's what changed my life.
And tell us about Hugh Osmond, who was your business partner, fellow undergraduate. How did that come about, and what was it that attracted you to each other?
Well, we met in the practicals in medicine. He was, like me, a fellow medic, although again he switched to physiology. And I could see that he was an independently minded character, and we hit upon this idea of hosting nights at a local nightclub and making it into a business. It was all an accident, really. We only did it in order to meet girls, frankly. But that soon became very secondary to the idea of this club running initially once a week, and then there were various offshoots, and we even had little enterprises going in Cambridge and Bristol. And doing that and creating something of our own and making it a success, and changing the way that nightlife operated in Oxford for students. Frankly, that was the most important thing I did at university, rather than get a qualification, which frankly I've never used. And I'm not to undermine academic qualifications, but I think for me, starting a business and seeing it work, and the satisfaction and the challenges that presented was, as I say, it was a turning point in my life.
And Era Nightclub and the other businesses, while you were studying physiology, was not what people did in the from 1980 to 83 when you were an undergraduate. I was there a short time before you, but I knew nobody who was involved in that kind of entrepreneurial activity. So it, was it? It was clearly very important to you both. The relationship was clearly important. Who was guiding you? Were your tutors at Magdalen sympathetic or irritated?
I think my main tutor, John Stein, with whom I'm still good friends, was probably largely ignorant, but if anything, he would have been irritated, but he was tolerant. And, I was lucky, I think, not to have been thrown out, because certainly for a period I did very little work, but I managed to get by and I got a degree. And in the meantime, as an undergraduate then, you had quite a lot of time at your disposal to pursue hobbies or other ventures. And in our case, ours was this nightclub business. And as I say, it was exciting, and it was our own venture. I don't think we really had mentors as such. I think we invented it as we went along. And that's really what was exciting. And I think it gave us the confidence to consider that you don't have to have a conventional hierarchical career that doing your own thing is a valid alternative.
I was interviewing Harvey Goldsmith recently, who did similar things, albeit at a different university to you, but then carried on doing it. Whereas in 1983, you started at Grieveson Grant, later Kleinwort Benson Security, which was a fairly conventional thing to do. Was that parental influence yanking you back in the direction of a steady salary?
I don't think it was my parents. I think I decided that I certainly wasn't going to pursue medicine, so I didn't even contemplate doing the clinical element of my degree. So I went into business, and I realized quite quickly that the stock market was an important element within the financial system. And so I determined to learn about it firsthand. And so I became an analyst at a stockbroker. And I did that for a few years. And I think it was useful in terms of understanding of how the stock market and financial markets work, analyzing businesses, meeting people and networking. And, I've been able to use that at various points later in my career, I think. So I think it was a useful period. There's no doubt through my 20s, while I was working for other people, I was frustrated and restless. And my then business partner, Hugh, didn't go and work for other people. He carried on with various nightclub enterprises full time. And I was involved in those to a degree, but obviously I had to do it at weekends and evenings and so forth. And it wasn't really until I was about 27 or so that I finally sort of broke free and decided to go full-time, self-employed, because I'd had enough of working for other people.
Big decision, Luke, not least in terms of finance and security. What gave you the impetus to make that jump?
Well, I think it was realizing that I was never going to progress in the way I might have in large corporate bodies like a bank. I was not cut out for that. I was, as I say, frustrated because I felt this was not the life I imagined I should be leading. And I also worked out, I think, that while I was young and single, without responsibilities and commitments of family and so forth, I had no children or anything. Actually, that's the best time really to go out on your own because you don't have those obligations. And so you can take risks. And if it all goes wrong and you fail, generally speaking, you can always pick yourself up and try again. And you haven't, thrown your family out on the street or had your family home foreclosed and repossessed. And I think it is easier if you start younger. You make your mistakes, you learn how it works, you start to understand calculated risks and so forth. And I think mostly people who start young, I mean, Branson, for example, I think started in his teens. He didn't even go to university. And I think the younger you can start, the better often, because I believe you gain confidence and you realize that you've developed resilience and other skills that I think are important to survival if you're going to work for yourself.
And Branson idea formation was only 3 miles from here at Stowe School, where his head teacher would regularly complain that he was constantly bombarding him with ideas for organizing the catering system and other aspects of school life differently. And this is very much the heart of the whole topic, Luke, and one that intrigues me about at what age can entrepreneurship be encouraged, and is that capability, interest innate or developed? And at Buckingham University, with our own enterprise and innovation unit, we're trying very much to start people early. Your first media eye-catching development was Pizza Express in 1993, but you'll tell me that there were important developments before 1993.
Yes, as I say, I started on my own full-time in about 1989.
89, yeah.
And actually my timing was poor because the UK went into quite a bad recession at that moment. And I would say that what I learned in those first few years was that often life is about overcoming failure and setbacks. And I had several businesses that didn't really work. And I think if you look at the careers of so many entrepreneurs, you will find that if you go back into their history, for example, I think Walt Disney went bankrupt before he created the biggest media empire in the world, etc. And, you know, that confidence, that determination and commitment that is so clear in so many successful entrepreneurs is often, I think, acquired early on because of things that didn't work, and you learn to pivot, you learn to overcome defeat and keep going. And I think those are important lessons, and the earlier you acquire them, the better in many ways. I think, you know, giving up is the one thing you cannot do. You have to keep moving.
And indeed, that's a regular theme of Luke's columns. And indeed, it's something that's often commented upon in the difference in the UK to the US attitude, where failure is more accepted as a norm, and in our education system and university system, but also business, failure is seen as such a black mark. Now, in 1993, you became chair of Pizza Express, and just to remind listeners, there were 12 outlets when you took it over. When you sold it 6 years later in 1999, there were 25, and the share price had increased from 40 pence to, I think, 900. What was it about you and Pizza Express that gelled and suddenly made everything go well?
Yeah, just before we carry on, I think it went from 12 to about 250, actually, not 25.
I said 25, I meant 250, sorry.
Well, it was a brilliant formula that had been underexploited. It had grown very slowly since its founding in 1965 in Soho and Wardour Street. And we realized that you could take it fully national, and that although it had grown partly through franchising, we determined that we wanted to own and operate all the restaurant branches ourselves. So we bought back all the franchises. And unlike when I started out on my own in 89, in 93 our timing was fortuitous in that the UK was coming out of recession, demand for eating out was increasing, sites were available, staff and talent was available, and there was limited competition in those days. And we offered a better experience, a more classy experience than the then competitors, people like Pizza Land and Deep Pan Pizza and Pizza Hut. And so we cleaned up, frankly, and we'd taken the business public, which proved a success. And I think after my various setbacks and reverses and mistakes in preceding years, this time I got lucky, and it made all the difference. And it was sort of the back of that winner that enabled the rest of my career to unfold. And so, as you say, although I left the business in 99 to pursue other ventures, it was a defining moment.
And indeed, I remember the restaurants expanding in the 1990s, 20-fold. And then 3 years later, in 1996, if I got the date right, you co-founded Integrated Dental Holdings, which became, after 10 years, the largest chain in the country with over 500 dentists. What gave you the confidence then to move out of catering retail into dentistry, perhaps a little bit more back into your undergraduate interest in biomedicine?
Well, it was luck more than anything. I was flicking through big yellow pages. We can all remember what they used to look like for inspiration, for ideas. And I realized, looking at the section for dentists, there were a lot of quite prominent adverts. And I suddenly thought to myself that all the dentists I'd ever met were very prosperous. And clearly this was a field of medicine where it was possible to do quite well. And I researched it and found out that actually it was only quasi part of the NHS. A big chunk of it has always been left in the dentist's hands, if you like. And I connected with a clever dentist called David Hudley, who was based in Liverpool, who had set up a group of privately owned dental practices in his city. And I got on with him well. Unfortunately, he then emigrated to Israel, so the idea was shelved. And then 2 years later, he came back and nagged me to revive this venture. By then, I'd got involved with Pizza Express. But in '96, his persistence paid off, and I said, okay. We co-founded Integrated Dental Holdings. We raised a little bit of extra money and brought in some other partners, and we bought in fact, the biggest dental laboratory, and used that as a platform. And then we did what they call a buy and build. So we set about mainly buying, although also opening, hundreds of practices over many years. And I was involved from '96 to 2006. And I was the largest shareholder by that time when I sold out of the business. He carried on for a number of years and grew it to be the largest business of its kind in the country. In fact, it already was in 2006. And I think at its peak, it was valued at the best part of £900 million. It was very successful. And I think that was a case of picking the right partner in David. Again, being lucky in terms of our timing. We were the first to do one of these dental practice roll-ups. I had seen what had gone on in America, where there'd been a number of these ventures undertaken in the years prior to us starting Integrated Dental Holdings. So that again inspired me. Although it was a sort of a slight roller coaster, the 10 years of my involvement, it was ultimately very successful. I suppose it taught me that you shouldn't necessarily just stick to one field, and that you can apply some of the skills and knowledge that you acquire in one industry to another. I'm not saying that dentistry is anything like restaurants, but I think our achievements with Pizza Express helped us in the journey with Integrated Dental Holdings.
So here you were, by the age of 40, successful on multiple fronts. And in 1999, you start Signature Restaurants, and that develops the Ivy, the Caprice, the Belgo chain. And that is picking up your point about Pizza Express, about high quality and differentiation and more.
Yes. Looking back, Signature was a slight ragbag. We had a whole host of different restaurant businesses, including, as you say, the Ivy, which was iconic, and the Caprice and Sheiky's. And we owned those for 7 years, and they were very successful under our ownership, and we sold them for a profit. They've since gone on to be taken across the country by a new owner. The most important part that came out of that was another restaurant chain that I and partners actually developed from scratch, called Strada. Which
went from 0 to 30 within 5 years.
Yeah, and that was a variation on pizza, but it was wood-fired ovens, which was, differentiating itself from Pizza Express in a much broader menu. And again, it was very successful in its heyday, and we sold that successfully after a number of years. Sadly, it's now almost disappeared, and I suppose proves the point that many restaurant brands and identities are invented, but not that many can last. Pizza Express, interestingly, has, but Strada sadly hasn't, and indeed Belgo hasn't really either now, which is a shame. But so be it. Tastes change, fashions move on, and there is ever more competition. And the whole casual dining sector, which you could put Pizza Express and Strada and Belga into, is ferociously competitive now, and obviously very, very badly affected by lockdown and coronavirus. And I think it's probably fair to say that I was lucky enough to be involved with it from, the very early 90s through to date. And I think this is almost certainly the end of the golden age for the restaurant business in this country. Anyhow, that's a different topic, but
can you predict, do you feel you have this intuition about what chains are going to, even with a defined product life cycle, which are going to thrive and which are going to sink? Is it instinct? Is it luck? Is it external factors beyond your control?
It would be good to think it was very scientific, and that if one did enough homework and research, you could prove what's going to work and what isn't through, desktop analysis. I don't actually think it does work like that, no. And I think there is a lot of luck and gut instinct in it. And I also think it is trial and error, because I think that you test a concept and you modify it and improve it as you go, and you tweak it. And I think then you can get closer to the right formula. What I would say is that mostly in recent years, I've not been tempted to start things from scratch in the food business. I have backed existing businesses. So the most recent one, I suppose, that's grown to a scale is an artisan bakery business called Gales, which I got involved with almost 10 years ago. And when I invested in that, became chairman, it had 6 branches, and now we have 10 times that many. And actually, we have survived remarkably well through 2020. Some of our branches stayed open throughout. I think ours has been an affordable treat that has appealed to people during lockdown. And we feel relatively confident about the prospects there. More confident, I would say, than many do in the full dining in experience types of outlets. And that is a good model, I believe. And again, we have tweaked it over the years to improve it.
And that's Flower Power City, or Flower Power City was part.
Flower Power City, no, was a different industry. Although that was actually what gave me the interest in artisan baking.
Oh, was it?
And that ultimately led to Gales.
How much is in a name like Flower Power City, clever names, or even the Ivy? I mean, I remember the Ivy back in the late 90s had such a mystique about it. How does that mystique come to a light on certain businesses, and how do you nurture that without spoiling it?
I think a name can help. I don't think it's what makes the difference. So you can have a great name, but it can still be a bad business. And you can even have a bad name and it be a good business. I think for distinctive select restaurants, and I guess the Ivy would fall into that category, certainly when there was only one anyhow, being exclusive like a members club, but without a membership list, if you want, or a fee, was the formula that the then owners, Jeremy and Chris, if you like, pioneered for the London dining scene with that restaurant. And I think that dining room was, the most celebrity-filled place in London on a Friday lunchtime in its heyday. And that elusiveness was very important to its appeal. And it gave it this cachet that, others, it's sought after.
How do you keep that cachet while then rolling out across the country? And what might happen to the Savoy, were there to be a Savoy in I don't know, Preston or an Eton College in Norwich. Is there what is the risk of rolling out, making more money from rolling out, but diluting the specialness?
Well, I think it's inevitable that there will be some deterioration in the quality, and inevitably, if it becomes more accessible, it's less exclusive by definition. And I think actually it is a sort of one variation on a very profound debate about when you are building a business, your career, what matters to you most? Is it that you build a perfectly formed enterprise which you control completely and doesn't overstretch you, but represents quite an achievement? Or is it better to go for growth and keep pushing and being relentlessly ambitious, more profit, more scale, don't worry so much about things like quality or meaning, but pursue growth at all costs? And obviously I've painted two slight extremes there, but I think most entrepreneurs probably follow one path or the other, i.e. scale and profits is the priority above and beyond everything else. Or I've met lots of entrepreneurs who lead very fulfilling lives who have decided to not, if you like, sacrifice everything to building a giant empire, but instead at some point in their career say, this is enough, and I don't want to compromise everything else, my family, my personal life. I have a very good standard of living. I've built a business of which I can be extremely proud. It's not as big as some of the rivals, but I know it extremely well. I know the names of all my staff, and I prefer a business of this sort of dynamics. And I think that's a very interesting philosophical debate for people who set up businesses, is how big does it need to be, and how big is enough?
There are so many questions and areas I could touch on. There are just two more questions I'm going to ask before moving on to student and other questions. So I'm not going to be talking about Risk Capital Partners, Tortoise, Tootsie's, Feng Shui, etc. Tootsie's. I'm not going to be talking about Giraffe, nor am I going to be talking about RSA, Channel 4, Institute of Cancer Research, Startup Board, and more. But I will just ask about Patisserie Holdings. How does that experience seem now, standing back from it, Luke?
Well, it was a pretty gruesome time, and the scars are still there. This was a business that I believed was more or less the most successful thing I've been involved with. And I'd spent 10 years building it up, and it was a very public failure. And there was fraud involved, and obviously I'm restricted as to what I can say about that. But there was a very profound sense of betrayal. And, it was a pretty colossal setback. But I think you cannot allow these things to define you, and you have to overcome disappointments and keep going. I think it would have been one alternative to slope away and hide oneself from that. But I felt, after considering it, that that would have been cowardice, and that you need to keep trying. You can't give up. That isn't productive. And you must try to retain your optimism and your animal spirits and move forward. And I've known from early on in my business career that failure's inevitable along the way if you take risks. Some are big, some are small. I've certainly had my fair share, but I think probably if you look at the careers of most very successful entrepreneurs. They've also had big setbacks, and they haven't allowed those problems to define them. And so, that's what I'm attempting to do in rebuilding my career.
Haven't they all had setbacks? And that it's because they've been able to transmute those setbacks into positive learning that they have gone on and up. Did it make you less trusting of others, that experience?
Yeah, very much so, because the people who, so to speak, let me down, I'd worked with for a considerable length of time. But, that doesn't mean to say I don't still work closely with partners in other businesses. I will continue to, because trust is in the very heart of society and all business transactions. And if you become profoundly suspicious, then I think life becomes very miserable. So you have to, overcome those fears and, as I say, move forward as far as you possibly can in a positive way. And, if I look at the length of my career, of course, there are difficulties like that, but there are also some winners. And that is the very nature of capitalism and life. I mean, at the current time, we're obviously in a very difficult period with coronavirus, and I'm very sorry to say that there will be, by the end of it, if you like, hundreds of thousands of businesses that go bust, and millions of people who will be added to the unemployment lists, who, through possibly no fault of their own, so to speak, will feel like failures, and they will have to overcome these problems and move on. And we, as a community, as a nation, will find this and the next year or two tough ones. But life resumes. We will overcome. We will make progress, and better times lie ahead. And you have to keep that sense of optimism. Otherwise, you give way to despair, and that is not the way ahead.
And that, what Luke was saying there, was very much the theme of his brilliant, if I may say so, column in the Sunday Times on the 26th of July, earlier, so this last weekend. And you talk about animal spirits in that. But my last question before moving on to questions, Luke, would be your own thinking time, your own ideas that you have. Do they come out of quiet reflection? Do they come out of the heat of business activity, out of conversations with others, or all of those?
In terms of where I get ideas for my weekly column from, I'd say
more generally, your business ideas for starting a new company, a new venture, ideas in general.
Well, I would say my weekly column ideas come from everywhere, from conversations, from reading something, from anywhere and everywhere, and they require time alone to fructify before that you can see that 750 words under the seam there's a beginning, middle, and an end. I think in terms of business projects, I'm very sorry to say, but I have come to the conclusion that my imagination is not as fertile as it was. And I look back at myself in my 20s and 30s and perhaps 40s and think that, I probably had more ideas and possibly even more confidence of my ideas, or ignorance about how difficult they might turn out to be, than I do now. And it doesn't give me any great delight to say this, but I wonder if I'd been a novelist, for example, whether I would still be able to write novels, because I certainly think that, I don't know quite why, but over the decades, it feels harder to discover new underexploited opportunities and get very excited about big projects. So again, I think that to a degree, one can see entrepreneurship as a relatively young man and woman's game, because I think at that age, you're perhaps less cynical, you are better in touch with which parts of the economy are growing, and you have a sort of delightful naivety of youth, which means that you try what appear to be foolish things that can turn out to be amazing new ventures.
And well, presumably entrepreneurs can have blocks in the same way that writers can. But this leads on to the first question from Aisha, who's a first year BSc student at the BEEI at Buckingham, who says, what are your thoughts, Luke, post-COVID on the risks and the opportunities that you were talking about in the column on Sunday, and how can startups best navigate their way through the uncertainties?
Well, having looked at the history of business and startups quite often from my writing, it is true to say that in immediate post-war periods, so for example after the Second World War and indeed after the First World War, a number of great fortunes were built in among the rubble. And I think chaos and change can often present opportunities. And I'm not saying that I personally am thrilled and embracing the new normal in every respect, but I do think that the dislocation that this terrible disease and indeed lockdown is causing will create remarkable opportunities. And I don't just mean the obvious ones of makers of vaccines or face masks, but the profits to be had from the shift of people working from home, and the idea that maybe people are taking a lot more outdoor exercise than they were 6 months ago, and that habit might continue. I'm involved, for example, with a business called Brompton Bicycles. It's the leading folding bike maker in the UK. And I have to say that we have had our best year in history in June by a major degree. And sales of bicycles are going through the roof. And as long as we can build them, we can sell them. And so, although there are many, many more losers than winners in this chaotic and troublesome time, there are some winners, and they aren't just the giant established groups like AstraZeneca or Amazon. There are startups and newer companies that are seizing the day and realizing that there's a gap there and that there's something new that can be sold to people. So the general shift towards e-commerce away from physical retail in of itself does create opportunities, I think, because the barriers to entry in terms of starting up an online business are very low. So if you've got the right e-commerce formula, it's probably easier than it is to build a physical store network, is to start a successful online business, as Boohoo and ASOS and obviously Amazon and others have done.
Brompton is very much the idea of Andrew Ritchie, so an entrepreneur who has stayed in that field. And this leads into a question from Johnny, who's a second year student, who talks about the wide diversity of your different businesses. He talks about from food to dentistry to banking to gaming and other areas. And he's asking, how can you manage to do that, and how important is the specialist knowledge of just one area, and again, using Brompton Bicycles as a launch point for that?
Well, I am a believer in what I call domain knowledge. So I respect people who have expertise and contacts in a specific sphere. And I think it's probably fair to say that you are more likely to make mistakes if you stray outside your own area of competence. And I have done that in the past. It depends on your type of personality. You know, some people want to go very deep and narrow and become a dedicated expert in one particular industry and stick to that. And I respect that. I think I'm restless, and so therefore I have strayed, and sometimes it's worked, sometimes it hasn't. I've almost certainly done a lot more in food and drink and hospitality than anything else. So in that sense, I'm a quasi-specialist. But I don't turn things down just because they're in an industry that I have never dealt with before. I think that opportunities and markets change, and one of the risks, I think, if you stick to one existing sector, is that technology changes, habits change, regulations change, and it can mean that your previously very successful business and booming sector can go into reverse. And even if you're terribly good, you can still suffer. And so I think now more than ever in history, you need to be nimble and flexible. And that probably means being willing to switch horses if necessary in order to remain prosperous.
Will King is asking you just to drill down into one particular area, which is catering, and he's wanting to know what your decision making was about expansion as against quality, and how would you take that decision to expand as against having the high grade quality factors, is his question.
Well, it's a tough one. There's always going to be a tension, because if you dumb down a business by expanding too fast, hiring the wrong people, and lowering the quality of execution, then eventually the customers will find you out, and you know, that's how businesses go wrong. But obviously, if you want a bigger, broader customer base, i.e., if you want 500 outlets as opposed to 50 or 5, it's going to have to be a more accessible offering. And, you know, there is only a small proportion of the country that can afford a very elite meal, shall we say. So I think, again, it depends on what you want out of life. Do you want a thing that's really big and to make a huge fortune, or do you want something that is incredibly good and you're in charge of every aspect of it, and it's, you know, family owned, and you know, you understand all aspects of it. And I think that's the trade-off that entrepreneurs need to think about hard and decide, do they want to be a big fish in a small pond, or vice versa? And that's the decision they need to make. And you know, quite a lot of entrepreneurs choose the former, i.e. to stay completely in control of their own destiny and not dilute, because control in some ways matters to them more than wealth. And I respect that. You know, it's a tough one, and it's down to the individual psychology and philosophy of the entrepreneur themselves.
Christian is asking about the way that the restaurant business is going to develop after lockdown, and perhaps with the presumption that we'll never get over coronavirus. We'll have just to learn to live with coronavirus and other viruses. Is the future, as you were suggesting, Luke, more artisan food, which is high quality and bought and consumed at home? What about the future of theatre and cinema? Thoughts about that?
I like to think that human face-to-face contact and socializing in real life rather than via Zoom is at the heart of what it is to be alive. And so I hope passionately that we do return to important things that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, like live performance, and be it festivals or theatres or music, and indeed the importance of going out and eating and drinking out in restaurants and pubs and what have you. So I think this is a temporary period. It may go on for many months, but I don't think it will change our whole way of life in this sense. However, I think that the loss of business and the disruption that it's caused to sectors like hotels and catering means that they are going to be in the doldrums for some time, and obviously a period of considerable losses and a lot of capacity taken out and seen by investors generally as much less attractive and more uncertain assets to own, which is a shame. But, they've had a tremendously good run. And as I say, I think they will come back. We need other people. We want to travel. We like entertainment. And I think doing it all via screen isn't the same. And it's a poor substitute, in my opinion. So I would still bet on our willingness to experience things firsthand rather than secondhand.
And finally, Nigel Adams, who's director of the Buckingham Enterprise and Innovation Unit, asked about what government you think, and you again were talking about this on your Sunday column, what can government do to provide a supportive environment for young entrepreneurs, with which he's dealing all the time post COVID, so that it doesn't intrude but does provide the maximum possible fertile soil in which entrepreneurship can develop?
Well, I think in the shorter practical term, we do need to have dates when things like social distancing will end, when public transport functions normally, when schools function normally, so that working parents can go back to work, so that the economy does revive. Because if unemployment stays structurally very high, and if the economy is chronically weak, then that is a poor backdrop for any entrepreneur, and a rising tide will lift more boats. I think longer term, we need medium long term planning so that there isn't arbitrary incoherent rule making and regulations as regards things like business. I think entrepreneurs who make investments and put their lives on the line over 5, 10, 15 or 20 years can get very discouraged and demoralized if suddenly new laws come in that mean their business can no longer trade, and they have to make people redundant. And so I think, we will have to adjust to this new virus and possibly other viruses, but I think the, total lockdown can never happen again. The extreme measures that we've introduced can't be reintroduced, and we have to become a lot more subtle and a lot more thoughtful about all the collateral damage that can be caused by, the sort of knee-jerk responses that this government has introduced, which I think, frankly, may end up causing more harm, so to speak, than the virus itself.
And can and should government be doing more to encourage equity to come into SMEs using institutions like the Business Growth Fund and others? Should there be a 20 billion growth fund for the growth economy?
I think one £20 billion growth fund's a bad idea. I think a series of funds, maybe £21 billion funds, would be better, because I think one set of people managing the entire lot with hundreds or even thousands of investments, it'll end up being a huge bureaucracy, and I think that's a bad idea. These things are best done on a micro level, so regionally or otherwise, I think they should be smaller offshoots if the taxpayer decides that we can afford 20 billion, much of which might be lost investing in high risk early stage businesses. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, I'm just saying it won't be without its consequences. And I think it should be done on a regional basis with a whole series of different managers, because I think you're more likely to get a better result than if you create one giant bureaucracy.
So bringing all this together, Luke, and coming back to the question of the day, are entrepreneurs born or made? There's clearly going to be a need for as great a need as ever for entrepreneurship after COVID, as we come out, as there was before. Thoughts about should more be done in schools and universities to encourage the entrepreneurial animal spirit? Would it work if we did? Is it just such an innate facility that no education will really make much impact on developing it?
I don't think it's a gene that says you can become an entrepreneur and someone else won't. I think the most important single thing from my study of the subject from a young age is role models. So I think it happens in the home where a parent at the kitchen table will be writing a business plan or dealing with invoices for their company, or some relative or friend. I think it happens as you're growing up and you meet people who are self-employed, who run businesses, and indeed at university and school and so forth. And I think it's quite difficult for the vast majority of teachers and academics who are part of the public sector usually and very much hierarchical professions to understand the mentality and the psychology of risk takers. But I think the more that can be done at every level, be it in a formal setting like a school or university to encourage people to start businesses, or to have role models available to mentor and to give an example, the better, because I think it isn't about qualifications ever. I don't think it is about seeing case studies of people who've done well, because every business venture is different by its nature and can't be a format. And it's about telling that people to have a go, not despair when things don't work, and pick yourself up and start over and do it better. And these people are needed more than ever right now, because we're going to have to create millions of new jobs in the coming years to replace those that have been lost. And my belief has always been the only engine of that job creation really at heart is not government, but entrepreneurs. Hundreds of thousands of them starting businesses, some of which will grow and take on lots of staff. And there's nothing like unemployment for creating a miserable society, and a happier one is one where people have work.
Well, that's a stunning and actually very moving rallying cry to finish this session, this conversation. Luke Johnson, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us at the University of Buckingham. We are deeply grateful, and thank you. And
thank you.
Best wishes from us all. Thank you.